has likely passed. Returning to our top story, the unfolding situation in Eastern Europe. These are live pictures from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. It's just after 2 a.m. there at the moment. In the last hour or so, the president has addressed his nation, warning it's his belief Russia has approved an offensive manoeuvre against Ukraine. He also said Vladimir Putin has not responded to requests to negotiate. Back home, Scott Morrison has conceded Australia's raft of sanctions may not prevent any invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I spoke earlier to Labor's Shadow Defence Minister Brendan O'Connor, began by asking him whether he anticipated retaliation for the sanctions we have placed on Russia.
Well, we have to stand up against such aggression, such blatant breach of international law, an act that will cause instability, cause suffering, and we need to stand, I think, shoulder to shoulder with our friends in Europe, and indeed with the United States, but most particularly with the Ukraine people. That is a democracy seeking to continue on as a sovereign state, and yet it's been undermined by this impending threat of invasion. So it's the right thing to do. We support the Australian government. I understand the sanctions will be enacted as of tomorrow, and I understand too that there'll be other possible sanctions we might consider, given that we are working very closely with those countries I just mentioned.
What's your message to voters? The perception is, this type of issue looming in an election might not help Labor.
But I don't think we should be thinking through the political prism when we're talking about a country, a sovereign state that's about to be invaded by another country. I think it's beyond those domestic matters when you're dealing with such aggression and such a fundamental breach of international law. And so I believe the Australian people would expect the Parliament, the Australian government, the opposition to work together in the national interest. And it is in our national interest, Tom, for us to stand by our values and to defend sovereign states, independent democratic states. So I actually think that the Australian people can distinguish between what we need to do on the international stage in such an important matter and still discern what they need to do electorally when the election is called down the track.
Europe's obviously a long way away. It's not our region and hence, I suppose, our sort of indirect involvement. Would the calculation be different if, for example, China invaded Taiwan?
Well, obviously that's a different set of circumstances, and it would be more immediate, proximate to us, given it's within the region. So we'd have to consider our response if that ever were to happen. Of course, Tom, our strong preference, a strong hope is that we won't see such an action by mainland China with respect to Taiwan, and we will do everything we can diplomatically to deter such conduct by China, and we say to China that they should desist in even contemplating such action. So, they're not comparable matters insofar as how it impacts on Australia, but they are two examples of potential breaches of fundamental breaches of international law.
But I guess essentially if China's watching and they say Australia's had a hands-off approach to this, our message would be, or your message would be, that that wouldn't necessarily be the case if they decided to invade Taiwan.
Well, I think the Minister for Defence got into significant trouble trying to answer hypothetical questions about whether we would end up in war with a nuclear superpower. Let's just say that we strongly oppose an invasion of Taiwan. We would be calling on the Chinese government not to ever contemplate or enact such action. But as for what happens if that were to occur, that's something to be considered then. National security agencies, of course, are very much focused on that issue. But our preference and our focus, and indeed our messaging, must be temperate, and it has to be clear and unequivocal. But the tone has to be temperate, and our very strong message must be: we want a stable, democratic, and peaceful region.
Just on the tone, because we have heard previously Labor, including leader, deputy leader as well, Anthony Albanese, Richard Marles, talk about the relationship and suggest that it's the diplomacy, the way we talk to China has damaged the relationship. And these comments are a little bit old, though. They're more like a year or two ago. Has that calculation changed? Do you think Labor can improve the relationship almost overnight just with a different tone, or is that too difficult now?
No, I don't think it would. There's no assumption that if we were to win office and as a government immediately repair the relationship between Australia and China, we do have to accept how critical the relationship, the trade relationship is for both countries. And of course, we hope that we can maintain a mutually beneficial trade arrangement so that we prosper and so the region and the world prospers. And so that's our intent going in. But we're under no illusion that the conduct of China is not about the behaviour of the incumbent Australian government. And it would be easy, Tom, for us to seek to suggest otherwise, but I think it's been clear from the Labor leader and from Senator Wong and others and myself that we don't believe that the breakdown in the relationship between our two countries is as a result of the Morrison government. We think it's been a material change in the attitude and conduct of China. Nonetheless, we will look to do what we can, as I'm sure the current government seeks to do, to repair where we can that relationship, because it is such an important trade relationship. And of course, if we can do things to deter aggressive behaviour in the region, then that would be something we'd be aiming for.
Okay, just finally on the AUKUS submarine announcement, you've previously said on this there's no plan, no contract and no decision for 18 months, but you say Labor supports it. How can you have full support for something with so little detail?
Well, we support the umbrella. We support the commitment of the United States and the United Kingdom to share technologies with Australia. It's not just about the nuclear submarines, and they are obviously off into the late 30s or 2040. It's also the access and collaboration and sharing of new technologies, including in areas of cybersecurity, artificial intelligence and the like. So we support the threshold and the framework of this arrangement, because there's so much potential for Australia in that arrangement. As for making up the point about no submarines, I think that's in the context of over 9 years now, almost. The government hasn't really settled and in fact had to tear up one submarine contract, which has cost us billions, obviously looked towards Japan before that. So there really hasn't been any action in an area we need to do more, and we haven't managed to do so.
Okay, so you support the AUKUS framework, but specifically on the subs then, what does that mean? Would you get into power and assess, if you do get into power, assess how to proceed or even whether to proceed with the nuclear submarine contract within AUKUS?
No, look, we believe that Australia will be best served with nuclear-propelled submarines, and the only way we can see that working where we don't have a nuclear industry is indeed accessing the technology of the United States or the United Kingdom, because we're able to have that component of a submarine last for the life of the submarine. But having said that, Tom, it's really important for everyone to understand there's a lot of work, enormous amount of work to do to increase our Navy. We need to increase our skill capacity to deal with this complex defence asset, and we need to have the infrastructure in place before the Americans, for example, would even consider providing us that asset.
Okay. Got to leave it there. Shadow Defence Minister Brendan O'Connor, thanks for your time today.
Thanks very much, Tom.